My husband David and I pulled up to the venue where my sister Sarah's wedding was about to take place. The envelope with $10,000 was tucked safely in David's jacket pocket, our wedding gift to Sarah. On top of that, we'd already covered about a third of the wedding expenses. It was a lot of money, but David's investment banking job and my position as a marketing director meant we could afford it. Plus, Sarah was my only sister. I tugged at the hem of my dress, feeling a knot of anxiety forming in my stomach. The weight of family expectations always seemed to hang heavier on me than on Sarah. You okay, Ellen? David asked, his hand warm on mine. Fine, I said, forcing a smile. Just wedding jitters. Not even mine, and I'm nervous. As we walked in, I spotted my parents immediately. Mom was fussing with Dad's tie while he pretended to be annoyed, but I could see the smile playing at his lips. They looked radiant. That was the only word for it. Mom's face was practically glowing with happiness, and Dad looked 10 years younger. Something twisted in my gut. I couldn't remember them looking this happy at my wedding 5 years ago. They'd been pleasant enough, sure, but not like this, not bursting with pride and joy. Look at them, I whispered to David. Have you ever seen them so happy? David squeezed my hand but said nothing. He knew the complicated history with my parents all too well. I quickly pushed the thought away. This wasn't the time to drag up old feelings. Today was about Sarah, and I was determined to be the supportive big sister I'd always been. The ceremony went perfectly. Sarah looked stunning in her dress, and her fiancé, now husband, Brian, couldn't take his eyes off her. I sat between my parents and David, trying to focus on the happiness of the day rather than the nagging feeling that my parents' reactions were somehow different than they had been at my wedding. Isn't she beautiful? My mother whispered, tears in her eyes. She is, I agreed, swallowing the lump in my throat. After the ceremony came the reception. We ate, drank, danced, and then it was time for the speeches. First, the best man, then the maid of honor, and finally, my parents stood up together. Mom tapped her glass gently. We want to thank everyone for coming today to celebrate our beloved daughter's wedding. There was something about the way she emphasized beloved that made me shift uncomfortably in my seat. David must have noticed because he placed his hand over mine. Dad continued, watching Sarah grow into the beautiful woman she is today has been the greatest joy of our lives. She's always been special, always brought so much light into our home. I smiled and nodded, wondering if I was just being oversensitive. Of course, they loved Sarah. They loved both of us. Then Mom reached into her purse and pulled out some papers. Brian, Sarah, your father and I wanted to give you something to start your new life together, something special. She held up the papers for everyone to see. We're giving you our family home as a wedding present. The room erupted in gasps, followed by thunderous applause. I froze. Beside me, David went rigid. I stared at my parents, then at Sarah, waiting for someone to laugh and say it was a joke, but it wasn't. My parents were beaming proudly, and Sarah didn't look surprised at all. She was crying happy tears, hugging Brian, who was staring at my parents with his mouth hanging open. The house, my parents' house, the house with the mortgage I'd been paying for the last 5 years because my parents couldn't afford it anymore after Dad's hours got cut and Mom's arthritis made it hard for her to work full time. I managed to plaster a smile on my face, but inside I was screaming. Not once had they mentioned giving the house to Sarah. They hadn't even asked me, and I was the one paying for it. Ellen, you okay? David whispered, his face tight with concern. Fine, I said through my teeth, still smiling as Sarah and Brian made their way to the front to hug my parents. My throat felt tight, like I was swallowing glass, but I kept that smile fixed in place. An hour later, I couldn't take it anymore. The weight of the betrayal pressed down on my chest until I could barely breathe. I found David by the bar. Can we leave? I asked quietly. He took one look at my face and nodded. I'll get our coats. We made our excuses. David had an early meeting. We were so sorry. Such a beautiful wedding. Congratulations again, and left before anyone could protest too much. The second we got in the car, I burst into tears. I can't believe they did that. I sobbed as David started the engine. I've been paying that mortgage for 5 years, and they didn't even tell me they were planning this. I know, David said grimly, his knuckles white on the steering wheel. It's unbelievable. And Sarah knew. Did you see her face? She wasn't surprised at all. I wiped my eyes angrily. This isn't about the money. I don't care about the money, but they could have talked to me first. Of course, it's not about the money, David said softly. It's about respect, common decency, something your parents seem to be lacking when it comes to you. The drive home, as we drove home, memories kept flooding back. All the times my parents had shown clear favoritism towards Sarah. I stared out the window, the city lights blurring through my tears. Remember when I graduated college and they gave me a card with 50 bucks, but when Sarah graduated 2 years later, they bought her a car? My voice cracked with the pain of the memory. David nodded, his jaw tight. That wasn't right. Or my 21st birthday dinner that they skipped because Sarah had a volleyball game, I continued, the words tumbling out now. A game, not even a championship or anything important. I remember, David said quietly. You tried not to show it, but I could tell how much it hurt you. The more I talked, the more examples I remembered. Each time Sarah got what she wanted while I got overlooked or forgotten. How my parents attended all of Sarah's events but found excuses to miss mine. How they bragged about Sarah's accomplishments but barely mentioned mine. It's like I've been invisible all these years, I said, staring at my hands. No matter what I do, it's never enough. I paid for their house, David. Their house. And they just gave it away, without even talking to me. By the time we got home, I was exhausted from crying and talking. My head pounded, and my eyes felt swollen and raw. Where are your parents going to live now? David asked as we got ready for bed. If they're giving the house to Sarah and Brian. I shrugged, pulling on my pajamas. I have no idea. That's not my problem anymore. I turned off the light and rolled over, trying to ignore the ache in my chest. But even in the darkness, I couldn't escape the feeling of betrayal that washed over me in waves. 3 weeks later, for the next 3 weeks, I went to work, came home, and tried not to think about the wedding or the house or any of it. I buried myself in marketing reports and budget meetings, putting on a brave face for my team while feeling hollow inside. Then one evening, my phone rang. It was my mother. Against my better judgment, I answered. Ellen, honey, Mom said as if nothing had happened, her voice light and casual. We're having a family dinner this weekend. Your sister and Brian are back from their honeymoon, and we'd love for you and David to join us. I sat frozen, staring at the wall. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to ask how she could possibly act like everything was normal. Instead, I gripped the phone tighter. Ellen? Are you there? Mom prompted. I wanted to say no. I wanted to hang up, but some part of me, probably the stupid, hopeful part, wondered if maybe they'd apologize, maybe they'd explain. Fine, I said flatly. We'll be there. Wonderful. Mom chirped. Saturday at 6. See you then. I hung up and sat motionless, feeling the familiar weight of obligation settle on my shoulders. When David came home, I told him about the dinner. His expression darkened. Are you sure you want to go? He asked carefully. After everything? No, I admitted. But I need to know what they're thinking. How they could do this. David sat beside me on the couch, taking my hand in his. Just remember, you don't owe them anything. Not anymore. The family dinner, Saturday, arrived too quickly. When we pulled up, I noticed Sarah's car in the driveway along with my parents' old sedan. We walked up to the front door, and I hesitated before ringing the bell. It felt weird not using my key, but this wasn't my parents' house anymore. It was Sarah and Brian's. Ready? David asked, his hand warm and steady on my back. I took a deep breath, as I'll ever be. Mom answered, all smiles. Ellen, David, come in, come in. She hugged me like nothing had happened, like she hadn't given away the house I'd been paying for without even talking to me about it. I hugged her back stiffly, catching the familiar scent of her perfume that once meant comfort, but now just made my stomach clench. Dad was in the living room with Brian watching a game. He stood up when we entered, giving David a firm handshake and me a quick hug. "Where's Sarah?" I asked, noticing her absence, trying to keep my voice neutral even as I felt like an outsider in the home I financially supported for years. "Oh, she's changing the curtains in the dining room," Mom said casually. "She's been redecorating all week." My blood boiled at that. 3 weeks. It had been 3 weeks since the wedding, and Sarah was already changing things around like she'd owned the place for years. I bit my tongue until I tasted blood. We walked through to the dining room, and there she was, my sister, standing on a stepladder, hanging new cream-colored curtains in place of Mom's old blue ones. "Ellen," she exclaimed, climbing down to hug me. "Isn't this place great? We're going to redo the kitchen next." I forced a smile that felt like broken glass. "Great." At the dinner table, "Dinner's ready," Mom announced. "Everyone sit down." We took our seats, me between David and Dad, with Mom and Sarah across from us and Brian at the end of the table. The food looked good, Mom's special pot roast with all the trimmings, but I had no appetite. The first 10 minutes were filled with Sarah and Brian describing their honeymoon in Hawaii in excruciating detail. "The water was so blue, you wouldn't believe it," Sarah gushed, her hands animated as she spoke. "And our hotel suite had this amazing view of the ocean." I picked at my food and nodded occasionally while David asked appropriate questions to keep the conversation going. Every time Sarah mentioned a luxury they'd enjoyed, I couldn't help thinking about how my financial support of our parents had freed up Sarah to enjoy her carefree life. "The spa treatments were divine," Sarah continued, not noticing my silence. "Brian even got a massage, didn't you, honey?" "Sure did," Brian agreed, looking uncomfortable for the first time. Maybe he was starting to sense the tension. Finally, when Sarah paused to take a breath, Mom cleared her throat. "So, we wanted to talk to you about something, Ellen," she said. "Well, as you know, we've given the house to Sarah and Brian as their wedding present." "Yes, I noticed," I said flatly, setting down my fork with a deliberate clink against the plate. Mom continued as if she hadn't heard the edge of my voice. "The thing is, they're a young couple starting their life together. They need their own space." I remained silent, waiting for her to get to the point. Dad shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "What your mother is trying to say," he said, "is that we can't live here with them. They need privacy." I felt David's hand on my knee under the table, a silent gesture of support. "I see," I said, still not sure where this was going. "So, where are you planning to live?" Mom and Dad exchanged another look. I noticed Sarah suddenly became very interested in her mashed potatoes, pushing them around her plate and avoiding my eyes. "Well," Mom said slowly, "we've been thinking about it, and we've decided we're going to move to your vacation home. It's the perfect size for us, and it's in a nice, quiet area." I set down my fork and knife carefully, a strange calm settling over me despite the blood rushing in my ears. The vacation home they were referring to as a small cottage I'd bought with my own money before I even met David. I'd saved for years to afford it, working overtime and weekends, sacrificing vacations and new clothes and dinners out. It was my special place, somewhere I could go to escape the city, and occasionally I let my parents use it when they wanted a weekend away. "Let me get this straight," I said, keeping my voice level. "You gave your house, the house I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, to Sarah, and now you think you're going to move into my vacation home without even asking me first?" "Ellen," Dad said, frowning, "be reasonable. Where else are we supposed to go?" "That's not my problem," I said, feeling a strength I didn't know I possessed. "You had a house. You gave it away without consulting me, even though I've been paying for it, and now you expect me to just hand over my vacation home to you?" "It's not like you use it that much," Sarah chimed in, her voice high and defensive. I turned to her, unable to hide my anger now. "Are you serious right now? It's my property. I bought it with my money. I get to decide who uses it and when." Mom's face had gone pale. "You can't mean you're saying no, are you?" Her voice trembled, and I saw the hint of tears in her eyes, the same tears that had always made me back down in the past. "That's exactly what I'm saying," I replied, surprised by my own firmness. "No, you are not moving into my vacation home. Not now, not ever." The table fell silent. Then Mom's face crumpled. "How can you do this to us?" she cried. "After everything we've done for you. We're your parents." I felt a hysterical laugh bubble up in my throat. "Yes, and as my parents, you might have thought to discuss this with me before giving away a house I was paying for and deciding to take over my property. You don't have the right to refuse us," Mom said, her voice rising. "We have nowhere else to go now." "You actually have your house," I pointed out, my voice steady despite the storm of emotions inside. "The one I've been paying the mortgage on for 5 years, but you gave it to Sarah, so now it's your problem to figure out where to live." Sarah slammed her hand on the table. "God, you're so cruel and greedy. You've always been jealous of me because Mom and Dad love me more. You've always been envious of our relationship." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I stared at her, stunned by her outburst and the raw truth it revealed. Then I turned to her, suddenly calm. "If Mom and Dad love you so much, and you love them so much, then why don't you let them live here with you? This is a 4-bedroom house, plenty of room." Sarah's mouth snapped shut. She looked away, suddenly finding her plate fascinating again. That's that's not the point," she mumbled. "Brian and I need our privacy. And I need my vacation home," I counted. Sounds like we both have needs. My parents started talking over each other, telling me how wrong I was, how disappointing, how selfish. I stopped listening. I stood up and picked up my purse. "David, I think we're done here." David nodded, standing up immediately. As we walked to the door, I heard my mother's sobs and my father's angry muttering, but for the first time in my life, I didn't turn back. I didn't try to fix it. I walked out the door with my head held high, feeling both terrible and strangely free. The aftermath. The next day, my phone exploded with messages and calls from my parents and Sarah. I ignored them all, feeling a mixture of guilt and righteous anger as the notifications kept appearing. Some called me selfish. Some begged me to reconsider. Some tried to guilt trip me with reminders of everything they'd supposedly done for me over the years. "Your mother is devastated, Ellen. How could you do this to her?" Read one text from my father. "I can't believe my own daughter would leave us homeless," said a voicemail from Mom, her voice quavering dramatically. "You've always been so bitter and jealous. Get over yourself." Sarah had written. I showed some of the messages to David, who shook his head in disbelief as we sat at our kitchen counter Sunday morning, coffee mugs in hand. "I think I need to block them for a while," I said, feeling a headache forming behind my eyes. "I can't keep reading these. It's like they're living in a completely different reality." "Do what you need to do," David said, kissing the top of my head. "Take care of yourself first. They're adults. They'll figure it out." So I did. I blocked their numbers and social media accounts, at least temporarily. I needed space to think, to process everything that had happened. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for years seemed a little lighter, even as guilt tried to creep back in. 2 weeks passed in blissful silence. No calls, no texts, no family drama. David and I fell back into our normal routine: work, home, occasional dinners with friends who didn't try to steal my property. It was nice, peaceful even. For the first time in years, I didn't feel that constant anxiety, that need to please everyone at my own expense. The security alert. I was at my desk reviewing a marketing campaign when my phone buzzed with an alert. I glanced down and felt my stomach drop. It was a notification from the security system at my vacation home. Motion detected, front door opened. I quickly checked the app. Someone had used a key to unlock the front door, but hadn't disabled the alarm system. The security company would be calling me any second to verify if this was authorized entry. "No," I whispered, staring at the alert. They wouldn't, but I knew they would. The entitlement, the assumption that what was mine was theirs to take. It was exactly what they would do. Sure enough, my phone rang almost immediately. "Miss Wilson, this is Safeguard Security. We've detected entry at your property on Pine Ridge Road. Is this authorized?" "No," I said firmly, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white. "I'm not there, and no one has permission to be there. Please send the police immediately." My heart hammered in my chest as I called David. "They're at the vacation home. I said when he answered. They're trying to move in anyway. Jesus, David muttered. I'm coming to get you. We'll drive up there together. An hour later, my phone rang. It was an officer from the local police department. Miss Wilson, this is Officer Reyes. We're at your property on Pine Ridge Road. We have two individuals here who claim to be your parents. They have keys to the property but admitted they don't have permission to be here. I closed my eyes, confirming my suspicions. Yes, they are my parents, but they absolutely do not have permission to be in my house. I understand. How would you like us to proceed? We can remove them from the property, but since they used a key rather than forced entry, it's a bit of a gray area for charges. I rubbed my temple, feeling the headache intensify. I'll come up there, I decided. My husband and I can drive up now. We're about an hour away. We'll wait for you, the officer assured me. The drive was tense. I alternated between anger and disbelief, staring out the window at the passing landscape but seeing nothing. How could they do this? I asked, breaking the silence. After I explicitly told them no, they tried to move in anyway. Who does that? People who've never heard the word no before, David replied quietly, his hands steady on the wheel. When we pulled up to my vacation home, there was a police cruiser in the driveway. Two officers were standing outside, and sitting on the front porch steps were my parents, looking miserable. Several suitcases and boxes were piled beside them. My father stood up when he saw us, his face a mixture of relief and indignation. Ellen, thank God you're here. He called out. Tell these officers there's been a misunderstanding. I got out of the car and approached the officers, ignoring my parents for the moment. My legs felt shaky, but I kept my voice steady. Thank you for responding so quickly. These are indeed my parents, but they do not have permission to be here. One of the officers nodded. Ma'am, do you want to press charges for trespassing? My mother gasped. Ellen, you wouldn't. I turned to look at her. She seemed smaller somehow, her face pale and drawn, but the familiar manipulative expression was still there in her eyes. You broke into my house after I specifically told you no. What did you think would happen? We didn't break in, my father protested, his voice rising. We used the key you gave us. For emergencies, I reminded him. Not to move in against my explicit wishes. This is all your fault, my mother suddenly shouted, standing up. Her voice cracked with emotion, and I saw real tears now, not the calculated ones she usually deployed. If you had just let us stay here like we planned, none of this would have happened. We wouldn't be standing here being treated like criminals. I stared at her, shocked by the outburst. My fault? You gave away a house I was paying the mortgage on without consulting me, then tried to take over my property without permission, and somehow this is my fault? You're so arrogant, Mom continued, ignoring my point, her face flushing with anger. So irresponsible. We raised you better than this. We gave you everything. Mom, stop, I said, my voice low. You're embarrassing yourself. You and Dad just tried to break into my house to move in after I explicitly told you no. And now you're standing here in front of police officers yelling at me about how I'm being irresponsible. That seemed to get through to her. She abruptly closed her mouth, but her eyes were still full of indignation. I turned back to the officers. I'd like a word in private, please. Private discussion with the officers. We stepped away from my parents and David. I don't want to press charges against them, I said quietly. They're still my parents, even if they're being absolutely ridiculous right now, but I can't have them staying here either. The officer nodded. We understand. Family situations can be complicated. He glanced over at my parents, who were whispering urgently to each other. We can take them to the station for a few hours, give them a stern warning about trespassing, then release them. Sometimes a few hours in a holding cell can be a good reality check. I considered this. The thought of my parents in a police station was unsettling, but maybe it was the wake-up call they needed. Yes, please do that, the younger officer added. They've got quite a bit of property with them. What would you like us to do about that? I sighed, looking at the pile of suitcases and boxes. Another problem to solve. I'll arrange for it to be stored somewhere safe. I walked back to where my parents were sitting. The fear in my mother's eyes was real now, and for a moment I felt a pang of sympathy. But I remembered all those years of putting them first, of being overlooked, of paying their mortgage while they favored Sarah. The officers are going to take you to the police station for a few hours, I said, keeping my voice calm and matter of fact. I'm not pressing charges, but I want you to understand how serious this is. You cannot just move into someone's house without permission, even if you're family. Ellen, please. My mother pleaded, reaching for my hand. We have nowhere else to go. I stepped back slightly, avoiding her touch. You should have thought of that before giving away your house. I'll make sure your belongings are stored safely until you figure out where you're going to live. My father stood up, his face red with anger. This is how you treat your parents? After everything we've done for you? I looked at him steadily. What exactly have you done for me, Dad? Can you name one thing you've done for me in the last 5 years that wasn't actually me doing something for you? He opened his mouth, then closed it again, unable to answer. The car with the police and my parents left while we waited for the locksmith. David made some calls and arranged for my parents' belongings to be taken to a nearby storage facility. I paid for 1 month and texted the details to my sister since my parents' numbers were still blocked. You doing okay? David asked, putting his arm around me as we stood watching the storage company load the last of my parents' things. Not really, I admitted. But I will be. The locksmith arrived and changed all the locks. By the time we left, the house was secure again. On the drive home, I felt drained but also strangely liberated. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my parents' manipulation and refused to be taken advantage of. What do you think they'll do now? David asked as we neared our apartment. Probably go crying to Sarah, I guessed, watching the familiar streets of our neighborhood come into view. She can deal with them. She got the house. She can take the responsibility that comes with it. David reached over and squeezed my hand. I'm proud of you, you know. That couldn't have been easy. I wasn't naive enough to think this was over, though. Knowing my mother, she would find a way to make me look like the villain in all this. She always did. The social media battle, I was right. A week later, I opened Facebook to find a long, dramatic post from my mother. It had already gathered dozens of sympathetic comments from relatives and family friends. Today, I learned what it means to be abandoned by your own child, it began. My husband and I, in our golden years, have been cast out like unwanted pets. Our eldest daughter, Ellen, had the police remove us from her vacation home like common criminals, leaving us with nowhere to go. The post went on, conveniently leaving out the fact that they had given their house to Sarah, that I had been paying their mortgage for years, and that they had tried to move into my vacation home against my explicit refusal. We are staying in a motel now, the post continued, struggling to make ends meet while our daughter enjoys her comfortable life, refusing to help the very parents who sacrificed everything for her. As I scrolled through the comments, people calling me heartless, cruel, ungrateful, something inside me snapped. I'd spent my whole life being the good daughter, the responsible one, taking care of everyone else's needs. And this was how they portrayed me. I can't believe this, I said to David, showing him the post. She's completely twisting everything. David's face darkened as he read. This is manipulative and dishonest. I think it's time you told your side. I started typing my own post in response. It was time for everyone to hear the whole truth. I've stayed silent about family matters until now, but since my mother has chosen to make our private issues public, I feel I need to share my side of the story. Here are the facts that were conveniently left out of my mother's post. For the past 5 years, I have been paying the mortgage on my parents' house because they couldn't afford it due to health issues and reduced work hours. I did this willingly because they're my family, and they needed help. 3 weeks ago, at my sister Sarah's wedding, which I also helped pay for, my parents announced they were giving their house, the one I'd been paying for, to my sister as a wedding gift. They did this without consulting me or even giving me a heads up. When I finally spoke to them after the wedding, they informed me that they had planned to move into my vacation home, again without asking me first. They had apparently worked this all out with my sister before her wedding. She would get their house, they would take my vacation property. When I refused to let them move into my vacation home, they attempted to move in anyway. They used a spare key I had given them for emergencies and triggered the security system. That's why the police were involved. I didn't have them arrested. despite what my mother's post suggests. I did have the police remove them from my property because they were trespassing. I then paid for a storage unit for their belongings. If my parents need a place to stay, perhaps they should ask my sister, who now owns a 4-bedroom house thanks to them and me, since I paid for it. I added a final paragraph. I've always done my best to help my family, but I won't be taken advantage of or painted as a villain for refusing to give up my property after already paying for theirs. Family goes both ways. It's about mutual respect, not just taking whatever you want because we're family. I hit post before I could second guess myself. David read it over my shoulder and gave me a thumbs up. The response was immediate. Comments started rolling in from cousins, aunts, uncles, even some of my parents' friends. But unlike the comments on my mother's post, these were supportive. I had no idea you were paying their mortgage. That's so unfair of them. Wait, they gave away a house you were paying for? That's crazy. You did the right thing, Ellen. It's time someone stood up to them. I should have felt vindicated, but mostly I just felt tired. This whole situation was exhausting, and broadcasting it publicly didn't exactly feel great, even if I was just defending myself. 2 days later, my cousin Jessica called me. Hey, I wanted to check on you, she said. Your parents tried to go back to their house. I mean Sarah's house now, but she wouldn't let them in. I sat up straighter, surprised despite myself. Seriously? Yeah. Apparently she told them it's her house now and there's no room for them. They're staying in some crappy apartment now, and your mom had to go back to working full-time to afford the rent. I didn't know how to feel about that. Part of me thought they deserved it. This was the situation they had created for themselves, but another part of me still felt a pang of sympathy. They were still my parents, even if they had treated me unfairly. Thanks for letting me know, I said. How did you find out? Your mom called my mom crying about it, Jessica explained. But even my mom thinks they were wrong this time. She said she always knew they favored Sarah, but this was beyond the pale. After we hung up, I told David what Jessica had said. It's just karma, he remarked, stirring pasta sauce at the stove. Yeah, I agreed, leaning against the counter. But I don't feel as satisfied as I thought I would. David set down the spoon and turned to me, his eyes gentle. That's because you're a good person, Ellen, unlike some people we could mention. It's okay to still care about them, even after everything they've done. Over the next few weeks, my parents tried to contact me several times. I saw their names on my phone, but couldn't bring myself to answer. I wasn't ready. The hurt was still too fresh, the betrayal too raw. One night as David and I were getting ready for bed, he asked me, "Do you think you'll ever forgive them?" I paused, toothbrush in hand, considering the question. Maybe someday, not for their sake, but for mine. Carrying around all this anger isn't healthy. I rinsed my mouth before continuing. And Sarah? That's more complicated. She knew what they were planning. She was part of it, and then she turned them away when they needed her. At least you know where you stand now, David said, pulling me close. No more illusions about who's important to them and who isn't. He was right. As painful as this whole experience had been, it had torn away the pretense. I'd spent years trying to win my parents' approval, trying to be as special as Sarah was to them. Now I knew that was never going to happen, and strangely, that knowledge was freeing. Epilogue. The next morning, I saw another call from my mother. This time, I let it go to voicemail. After a minute, I listened to the message. Ellen, her voice was different now, smaller, less demanding. We made a mistake, a big one. I know you're angry, and you have every right to be, but please call us back. We need to talk. I deleted the message without calling back. Maybe someday I'd be ready to hear their apology if that's what they were offering. Maybe someday I'd be ready to have them back in my life on new terms, with clear boundaries, but not today. Today, I was still learning how to put myself first, something I should have done a long time ago. As for my vacation home, I decided to list it for rent. The extra income would be nice, and I liked the idea of the place being used and enjoyed rather than sitting empty as a reminder of everything that had happened. I'd find a new special place, one without the weight of painful memories. David came into the kitchen as I was making coffee, wrapping his arms around me from behind. You okay? He asked, resting his chin on my shoulder. I thought about it for a moment, then nodded. Yeah, I actually am. For the first time in a long time, I feel like I can breathe. And it was true. The weight that had pressed on my chest for years was finally lifting. I had stood up for myself, set boundaries, and chosen my own well being. It wasn't perfect, and the hurt wasn't gone, but I was on my way to something better, a life defined by my own choices, not by endless obligation and unappreciated sacrifice. I turned in David's arms and kissed him. Thank you for being there for me through all of this. Always, he promised, and I believed him. My name is Maria, and 3 years ago I bought a country house that seemed perfect for me. It was in a quiet area close to some amazing ski slopes. The location was ideal since I work remotely as an app development team leader, and honestly, I'm not exactly what you'd call a social butterfly. At 52, I've spent over 20 years building my career in the tech industry, and this mountain retreat was my reward to myself, a sanctuary where I could finally find some peace. Growing up, I was always the quiet one in my family. My older brother David was the athletic star who married his high school sweetheart Lisa. They have two kids, Thomas, who's 10, and Emma, who's 8. My younger sister Rachel was the popular one who married her college boyfriend Mark, and they have a 6-year-old named Lily. My parents are both retired now, mom's 75 and dad's 78, but they still try to run everyone's lives like they did when we were kids. When I told my family about my new house at my father's birthday dinner, I saw something light up in their eyes that made me immediately regret sharing the news. My heart sank as I recognized that look, the same one they'd get whenever they found a way to insert themselves into my carefully constructed life. A house near ski slopes? That's perfect. You should host Christmas this year, my mom said, clapping her hands together like she just solved a major problem. I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the one that always appeared when my carefully laid plans were about to be derailed by family expectations. I don't know, I replied, fidgeting with my coffee mug, trying to keep my voice steady. It's not that big, and I'm not really set up for entertaining. I glanced around the table, hoping someone would understand my hesitation. Nonsense, Dad chimed in, waving his hand dismissively. It'll be good for you to have some company. You spend too much time alone with your computer. His words stung, as they always did when he reduced my career to playing with computers. David nodded, his expression that of an older brother who thought he knew what was best for me. The kids would love to go skiing. Come on, Maria, it'll be fun. The way he said it made it clear this wasn't really a request. The decision had already been made for me. After thinking about it for a few weeks, I reluctantly agreed. I figured it would be just that one time. Maybe hosting one Christmas wouldn't be so bad. It might even be nice to have the house filled with people for once. Just this once, I whispered to myself as I sent the confirmation text to my mother. I can handle anything for a few days. As Christmas approached, I worked extra hours to get ahead on my projects. The holiday season is actually one of my busiest times as everyone wants their new apps ready for the December rush of phone gifts and downloads. I could feel the pressure building as I tried to balance my professional responsibilities with the looming family visit. The closer the holiday got, the more I realized I wouldn't have time to cook the massive spread my mom would expect. Each night, I'd fall into bed exhausted, my mind racing with deadlines and dinner plans, wondering how I could possibly meet everyone's expectations. The day before everyone was due to arrive, I called up the best local restaurant and ordered their holiday package. Turkey, ham, sides, desserts, the works. It cost a fortune, but I figured it was worth it to avoid the stress of cooking while trying to finish my work. This is an investment in my sanity, I told myself as I handed over my credit card information. When my family pulled up to my house, it was like watching a clown car unpack. Bags, presents, ski equipment, and noisy kids poured out. My carefully organized home was about to become chaos, and I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the invasion. My mom rushed over and hugged me tightly. Oh, Maria, this place is gorgeous. I can't believe you live here all by yourself. There was that tone again, the one that suggested my solitary lifestyle was somehow incomplete or sad. I smiled, already feeling the introvert alarms going off in my head. Thanks, Mom. Let me show you around. The tour took about 5 minutes. It wasn't a mansion, just a modest 3-bedroom place. I'd converted one bedroom into my office, which meant most of my family would be sleeping on air mattresses and pull-out couches. I could see my mother's lips purse slightly as she assessed the sleeping arrangements. "Where's the Christmas dinner?" Mom asked, peering into my kitchen. "Don't tell me you haven't started cooking yet." Her voice held that familiar note of disappointment that still had the power to make me feel like I was 10 years old again. "Actually, I ordered everything from Pine Valley Restaurant. They're delivering it tomorrow morning," I explained, trying to sound confident in my decision. "They have the best holiday package in town." My mother's face fell so dramatically you'd think I just told her I was canceling Christmas altogether. She pressed her hand to her chest, her wedding ring catching the light as she shook her head slowly. "Restaurant food for Christmas, Maria? I've been looking forward to your home cooking." She made it sound like I regularly invited people over for gourmet meals, when in reality she had no idea how I live my day-to-day life. "Mom, I've been swamped with work. I didn't have time to." I tried to explain, the familiar feeling of inadequacy creeping up my spine. "A good hostess would have made time," she interrupted, her lips pursed. "When I hosted Christmas, I started preparing days ahead." She glanced around the kitchen like she was evaluating a disappointing hotel room. I bit my tongue, feeling the words I wanted to say burning inside. There was no point arguing with her. She'd never understood my career, always treating it like some kind of hobby rather than an actual job that paid for this house and everything in it. Christmas dinner actually went better than I expected, despite my mother's disapproval. Everyone seemed to enjoy the restaurant food, though Mom made sure to mention at least 3 times how she would have prepared certain dishes differently. I smiled through it all, the mask I'd perfected over decades firmly in place. We exchanged gifts after dinner, and I'd spent weeks picking out perfect presents for everyone. The latest gaming system for David that he'd been hinting about for months, designer boots for Lisa that matched her favorite coat, a spa package for Rachel to give her a break from the kids, a high-end watch for Mark that I knew he'd been eyeing, and toys the kids had specifically requested from Santa. For my parents, I'd splurge on a weekend at a luxury mountain resort, complete with spa treatments and gourmet dining. In return, I received a coffee maker. Not a high-end one, but the kind you'd find on sale at any department store. The price tag was still partially visible on the bottom, a glaring reminder of the imbalance between what I gave and what I received. "We all pitched in together," Rachel explained with a bright smile, seemingly oblivious to the fact that their combined gift probably cost less than what I'd spent on any one of them. "We know how much you love coffee." I forced a smile and thanked them, holding back from pointing out that I already had a perfectly good coffee maker they'd been using all week, or that the combined value of their gift was probably less than a tenth of what I'd spent on them. But that wasn't the point of Christmas, I reminded myself, swallowing down my disappointment. The days after Christmas were a blur of noise, mess, and barely contained chaos. The kids used my house as a playground, racing up and down the stairs, spilling drinks on my rugs, and leaving toys everywhere. The adults went skiing during the day and returned to more restaurant food that I continued to pay for without complaint. Not once did anyone offer to help clean up. Dishes piled in the sink, wet towels were left on bathroom floors, and nobody seemed to notice or care. Each night, I'd wait until everyone was asleep, then quietly clean up enough to keep my sanity. I'd move through the darkened house, picking up abandoned mugs and straightening cushions, wondering how my family could be so oblivious to the mess they created. By the fourth night, exhaustion had settled into my bones, but my need for order wouldn't let me sleep amid the chaos. "Maria, we're out of coffee," my dad announced one morning as I was trying to squeeze in an hour of work before everyone woke up. He stood in the doorway of my office, already dressed in his new ski pants that I'd bought him for Christmas. "There's a grocery store 10 minutes away," I replied, not looking up from my computer screen where an urgent email from a client was demanding my attention. "Well, we don't know the area," he complained, his tone suggesting I was being unhelpful. "And we're all getting ready to go skiing." I looked up at him standing there in his new ski pants that I'd bought him for Christmas, the irony not lost on me. "I'll go get some after I finish this section," I said, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice. "We wanted to have coffee before we head out," he pressed, completely ignoring the fact that I was clearly working. The good coffee, not that instant stuff. So I closed my laptop, got dressed, and drove to the store while everyone else continued getting ready for their day of fun. As I stood in the checkout line, I couldn't help but wonder if any of them had any idea what it cost me, not just financially, but in time and emotional energy, to host them. By New Year's Eve, I was exhausted and behind on my work. I hadn't had a moment to myself in a week, and my bank account was feeling the strain of feeding 9 people restaurant meals every day. Yet somehow, I was still expected to be the perfect hostess, smiling and attentive to everyone's needs. "This has been so wonderful," Mom said as we clinked glasses at midnight. Her eyes were bright with happiness as she looked around at the family gathered in my living room. "We should do this every year." I nearly choked on my champagne. The thought of repeating this experience annually made my stomach clench with dread. But all I could manage was a tight smile and a noncommittal nod. The next morning, they all packed up to leave. Not one of them stripped a bed or washed a dish. They hugged me goodbye, thanked me for everything, and drove away, leaving me with a house that looked like it had been hit by a tornado. I stood in the doorway watching their cars disappear down the road, a strange mixture of relief and emptiness washing over me. Once they were gone, I surveyed the damage. Crumbs ground into my carpet, sticky spots on kitchen counters, bath towels piled high in the laundry room. I spent the entire day cleaning, stopping occasionally to answer urgent work emails with apologies for my delayed responses. By evening, my house was mine again, quiet and orderly, but I felt hollowed out. A year passed quickly. My work kept me busy, and I was grateful for the peace and quiet of my house. I found myself cherishing simple pleasures: coffee on my deck watching the sunrise, uninterrupted hours of focused work, evenings with a good book and no one demanding my attention. Mom and Dad would call occasionally, usually on holidays or my birthday, but they never mentioned Christmas again, which gave me hope that maybe they'd forgotten about making it a tradition. That hope was shattered exactly 2 weeks before Christmas when my phone rang. I was in the middle of debugging a critical app feature when Mom's name flashed on my screen. I hesitated before answering, something in my gut already telling me what was coming. "Maria, I'm so excited to tell you, we're all coming back to your place for Christmas this year." Mom called with her extra cheerful voice, the one that brooked no argument. "David and Rachel have already arranged time off work, and the kids are so excited to go skiing again." My stomach dropped immediately. The familiar pressure began building in my chest, that sensation of being trapped that I'd known all my life when family expectations collided with my own needs. "Mom, I don't think that's going to work this year," I tried to explain, my voice quavering slightly. "I have some major projects due, and the house really isn't set up for nonsense." "You're always working too hard. Family is more important than those little computer games you make," she interrupted, dismissing years of my professional accomplishments in a single sentence. "Besides, everyone's already planning on it. You wouldn't want to disappoint the children, would you?" Before I could protest further, she hung up with a cheery, "We'll see you on the 23rd. Love you," leaving me staring at my phone in disbelief. I spent the next few days weighing my options, but ultimately did what I always did. I started preparing for their arrival. I cleared my schedule as much as possible, stocked the refrigerator, and mentally prepared myself for another week of chaos. The familiar pattern of prioritizing their expectations over my own needs was so deeply ingrained that I barely questioned it. What I wasn't prepared for was the text I received a full week before I was expecting them, saying they had just left and would be at my place by dinner. I nearly dropped my coffee mug as I read it, my heart racing with anxiety. Surprise! We decided to come early. Kids got out of school sooner than expected, and we all managed to get extra time off. "See you tonight." The cheerful message from Rachel made my blood run cold. I called my mother immediately to confirm what I was reading, my voice tight with barely controlled panic. "Mom, I just got a text from Rachel saying you're all coming today. I thought you were coming on the 23rd. "Yes, isn't it wonderful?" she explained with delight in her voice. The kids got out of school earlier than expected, and we all managed to get more time off. We're about halfway there now. "But Mom, I'm not ready," I protested, looking around at my house that was nowhere near prepared for guests. I have meetings scheduled all day, and I haven't even bought groceries or changed the sheets or, oh, Maria, always so fussy about details, she interrupted with a laugh. We don't expect everything to be perfect. We're family. Besides, now we get an extra week together. Isn't that lovely? When I explained that I had thought they were coming on the 23rd as originally discussed, she acted like the change of plans was a wonderful surprise rather than a complete disruption to my work schedule and life. The fact that I might have had other plans or commitments never seemed to cross her mind. 7 hours later, my driveway was once again filled with cars, and my house was filled with noise. I'd spent the intervening time in a frenzy of preparation, canceling meetings, apologizing to clients, rushing to the store for essential groceries, and trying to make my home somewhat presentable while fighting waves of resentment and anxiety. Mom burst through the door first, giving me a quick hug before immediately looking around with a critical eye. Maria, you haven't decorated yet? It's almost Christmas. Her voice held that familiar note of disapproval that still had the power to make me feel inadequate, even at 52. When I explained I was planning to do it that weekend since I wasn't expecting them until the following week, she simply waved dismissively and said it was good they were there early to help. The help turned out to be Mom directing me where to put everything while she supervised from the couch, occasionally commenting that certain decorations would look better in different spots. Meanwhile, the kids were already making themselves at home, pulling out toys and games and spreading them across my freshly vacuumed floor. Thomas and Emma raced up and down the stairs playing some kind of chasing game, while Lily dragged her collection of dolls into the center of my living room. Their parents seemed oblivious to the chaos, chatting and laughing as they unpacked their bags. Soon after unpacking, Mom announced there was nothing to eat in the house. Maria, there's hardly anything in your refrigerator. What were you planning to feed us? She asked, hands on her hips as she surveyed my kitchen. I reminded her I wasn't expecting them until the following week and offered to cook something in an hour once I finished an important work call, but she insisted on ordering from the expensive restaurant we had used last year. We're all starving now, and the children get cranky when they're hungry, she insisted. I handed over my credit card, knowing I'd probably regret it but too exhausted to argue. Just the essentials, Mom. I've already spent a lot this week preparing for your visit. I couldn't keep the edge of frustration from my voice. She patted my cheek like I was still 12 years old, that patronizing gesture that always made me feel small. Don't worry about money during the holidays, dear. Family is what matters. Her words might have sounded loving to an outsider, but I recognized the subtle manipulation. Family mattered when it served her purposes, but my needs as part of that family rarely seemed to count. 2 hours later, she returned with bags of prepared meals from the gourmet section of the grocery store, 3 expensive bottles of wine, and a receipt that made me wince. Mom, this is way more than we need, I exclaimed, calculating the cost against my budget and the work hours I was losing. When I'm on vacation, I like to enjoy myself, she replied, unpacking the bags with satisfaction. Besides, I never get to relax at home. There's always so much cooking and cleaning to do. The irony that she expected me to do all the cooking and cleaning during their stay seemed completely lost on her. That evening, as everyone ate the expensive food I'd paid for and talked about their plans for skiing the next day, I sat at the end of the table feeling invisible. No one asked about my work or my life. When I mentioned the project deadline I was facing, David rolled his eyes and said, "Always working, Maria. You need to learn to relax like the rest of us." I wanted to point out that the rest of them were relaxing in my house, eating food I paid for, while I would be up late trying to meet my deadlines, but I swallowed the words with a sip of wine. The familiar pattern of silence that I'd perfected over decades settled over me like a heavy blanket. Christmas morning arrived, and once again I had ordered a full holiday meal from Pine Valley Restaurant. It cost even more this year, but watching my family's faces light up as they dug into the food almost made it worth it. Almost. As we ate, I calculated the total cost of their visit so far: food, extra utilities, time off work, the opportunity cost of missed deadlines, and tried not to let my anxiety show. After dinner came the gift exchange. I had once again spent weeks choosing perfect gifts for everyone. A drone for David that he'd been talking about for months, designer winter boots for Lisa, a spa package for Rachel, a high-end watch for Mark, and toys the kids had specifically asked for. For my parents, I'd splurged on a weekend at a luxury mountain resort, complete with couples massages and fine dining. When it was my turn to open gifts, they handed me a medium-sized box from all of them. Inside was a coffee maker, not a high-end one, but the kind you'd find on sale at any department store. The price tag was still partially visible on the bottom, and I could see it had been purchased at a significant discount. Rachel explained that they had all pitched in because they knew how much I loved coffee. "We noticed you make coffee every morning, so we thought you'd like a new one," she said enthusiastically. I forced a smile and thanked them, holding back from pointing out that I already had a perfectly good coffee maker they'd been using all week, or that the combined value of their gift was probably less than a tenth of what I'd spent on them. The disparity wasn't just about money, it was about thought, effort, and consideration. "It's perfect," I lied, placing it carefully back in its box. "Thank you all." I wondered if any of them noticed the coffee maker sitting on my counter that they'd been using every day, or if they simply didn't care enough to pay attention to my life and what I might actually need or want. That evening, as everyone relaxed in the living room watching a Christmas movie, I found myself cleaning the kitchen alone. The sink was piled high with dishes, and the counters were covered in food spills. I'd been at it for nearly an hour when Rachel walked in to get another glass of wine. "This place is a mess," she commented, looking around at the disaster that her family had helped create. "Yeah," I agreed, hoping she'd take the hint and offer to help. My back ached from bending over the sink, and my hands were red and raw from the hot water. Instead, she filled her glass and said, "Mom's asking if there's any of that chocolate cake left from yesterday. The kids want dessert." I dried my hands on a towel and turned to face her, something inside me finally snapping after decades of silent accommodation. "Rachel, would you mind helping me with these dishes? There's a lot, and I've been cleaning up after everyone all week." She looked genuinely surprised, as if the thought had never occurred to her. "Seriously? I'm on vacation in Maria, and the kids are finally settled watching a movie." She took a sip of her wine, leaning against the counter I had just wiped clean. "I'm on vacation too," I pointed out, my voice quivering slightly with the effort of standing up for myself. "Or at least I'm supposed to be. But I've been working and cleaning and paying for everything since you all arrived." She rolled her eyes dramatically. "It's your house. You can't expect guests to clean." "I can expect family to pitch in," I counted, feeling 52 years of suppressed frustration bubbling to the surface. "Especially when they invited themselves a week early and have been treating my home like a hotel." Rachel's face hardened. "Well, excuse me for thinking we could enjoy our family vacation without being put to work. I'll go get Mom." She turned on her heel and stormed out, wine sloshing in her glass. Minutes later, both Mom and Rachel returned to the kitchen with indignant expressions. Mom took Rachel's side immediately, crossing her arms over her chest and fixing me with the disappointed look I'd known all my life. "Maria, your sister tells me you're demanding she clean up on her vacation," Mom said, her tone making it clear which side she was taking. "That's not very hospitable of you." "I've been cleaning up after everyone for 10 days, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'm exhausted, I'm behind on work, and I just asked for a little help." "If you didn't want to host, you shouldn't have invited us," Mom replied firmly. "I didn't invite you." The words burst out before I could stop them. "You invited yourselves, changed the dates without asking me, and have been treating my house like a free hotel since you arrived." A heavy silence fell over the kitchen. Mom's face registered shock, then hurt, then anger in rapid succession. Rachel stood behind her, a smug expression suggesting she'd won this round. "Well," Mom finally said in her martyred voice, "I see how it is. We won't bother you anymore tonight." She turned and walked out, Rachel following after shooting me a triumphant look. I finished the dishes alone, tears of frustration stinging my eyes. After years of accommodating everyone else's needs and wants, the one time I asked for help, I was made to feel selfish and unreasonable. The familiar weight of being the family disappointment settled over me as I wiped down the counters. New Year's Day arrived, and I was counting down the hours until everyone would leave, mentally preparing for the return to my peaceful, orderly life. But at dinner, Dad cleared his throat and made an announcement that sent ice through my veins. We've all been having such a great time, he said, beaming around the table, that we've arranged to take more time off. We'll be staying for another 2 weeks. I was stunned, the fork I was holding clattering against my plate. 2 more weeks? My carefully constructed work schedule, my deadlines, my sanity, all of it would be completely derailed. The panic must have shown on my face. But that wasn't what we planned, I said, struggling to keep my voice level. I have work commitments and deadlines that I've already pushed back once. Oh, Maria, always so worried about those little phone games, Mom dismissed with a wave of her hand. Family is more important than work. You should be happy to have us around longer. The casual dismissal of my career, one that had taken me decades to build and that paid for everything they were enjoying, felt like a slap. I looked around the table, hoping someone would understand my position, but they all wore expressions ranging from indifference to annoyance at my lack of enthusiasm. My job isn't little phone games, I said quietly but firmly. I lead a development team that creates applications used by millions of people. It's how I pay my mortgage and how I've been funding this entire vacation for all of you. Well, someone's getting defensive, Rachel smirked, sharing a knowing look with Mom. We're just saying family should come first. Family should respect each other, I replied, feeling a lifetime of resentment threatening to spill over. And respect includes understanding boundaries and commitments. The conversation shifted awkwardly to other topics, but the tension remained. I excused myself early, retreating to my office where I sat staring at my computer screen, trying to figure out how I would manage 2 more weeks of this invasion. The 2 additional weeks my family stayed were absolute hell. Mom kept demanding money for food, insisting that since they were on vacation, they deserved to eat well. We don't want to cook on vacation, Maria. Can't you just order in again? Became her daily refrain, always accompanied by that expectant look that assumed my compliance. Dad spent most of his time on the slopes, coming back only to eat and sleep. When he was around, his main contribution was to ask me to run errands, more coffee, a different kind of beer, a specific brand of chips that only one store carried. Each request was made with the assumption that I would drop whatever I was doing to accommodate him. David and Rachel barely supervised their kids, who were getting more restless by the day from being cooped up. The children's energy found outlets in my home, jumping on furniture, racing through hallways, exploring every cabinet and drawer. Twice I found my expensive skincare products emptied into the sink, creating potions. When I mentioned it to Rachel, she laughed it off. Kids will be kids, Maria. Don't be such a fuss budget. My work suffered terribly. I tried explaining to my family that I needed quiet time to code, but they treated my job like it was some kind of hobby I could set aside whenever they wanted attention. David would knock on my office door with trivial questions. Rachel would send the kids to visit Aunt Maria when she wanted a break. Mom would call me out for being antisocial whenever I spent more than an hour working. One particularly stressful day, my boss called me directly. I saw Jack's name appear on my phone and felt a surge of anxiety. He never called unless something was seriously wrong. Megan, is everything okay? You haven't been responding to emails, and the client is getting anxious about the timeline. His voice held concern, but also a note of frustration that made my stomach clench. I locked myself in the bathroom to take the call because it was the only quiet place in the house, sitting on the edge of the bathtub and speaking in hushed tones. I'm sorry, Jack. I've had some family situations come up. The words felt inadequate to describe the chaos I was living in. I understand personal emergencies happen, but this project is time sensitive. The entire marketing campaign is built around this launch date. Can you get back on track by Friday? The pressure in his voice was unmistakable. I promised I would, knowing it meant pulling all-nighters after everyone went to bed. As I ended the call, I caught my reflection in the bathroom mirror, dark circles under my eyes, tension lines around my mouth, a weary expression that made me look a decade older than my 52 years. That evening, I worked frantically in my office with the door firmly closed, trying to make up for lost time. The house had finally quieted as everyone settled in to watch a movie. I was just beginning to make progress on a particularly complex piece of code when I heard the unmistakable sound of my office door opening. I spun around to find my nephew standing at my computer desk, his fingers already reaching toward my mouse. Can we play a game, Thomas? He asked, his 10-year-old face alight with curiosity as he peered at my screen where sensitive client information was displayed. No, I said sharply, jumping up from my chair and moving between him and my workstation. This is my work computer. It has important files on it that I can't risk being damaged. But we're bored, Emma whined from the doorway, where she stood with her little cousin Lily. Mom said to find something quiet to do. Where are your parents? I asked, trying to keep the frustration out of my voice as I gently guided them away from my desk. Mom said to find something quiet to do, Thomas repeated, still eyeing my computer with interest. She and Aunt Lisa and Grandma are watching a show about people getting married. I took a deep breath, counting silently to 10 as I learned to do decades ago when family tension threatened to overwhelm me. This isn't a place for kids to play. My work is important, and I can't risk losing any files. Please go find your mom and tell her I said you need supervision. They reluctantly left, and I locked the door behind them, leaning against it for a moment with my eyes closed. The deadline loomed in my mind, alongside the knowledge that my family would be here for another 12 days. Something had to give. 15 minutes later, there was a loud knock. Maria, open up. Rachel's voice was sharp with annoyance. I opened the door to find my sister standing there with both Thomas and Emma, her face flushed with indignation. The kids said you yelled at them, she accused, hands on her hips. I didn't yell. I told them they can't play with my work computer, I explained, keeping my voice deliberately calm. That computer has all my work projects on it. If they accidentally delete something or download a virus, I could lose weeks of work and potentially my job. Rachel rolled her eyes dramatically. You're being melodramatic. They just wanted to play a game. It's not like they were going to break anything. Rachel, they're children. They don't understand the risks, I said, feeling my patience wearing thin. I have a major deadline, and my boss already called today concerned about delays. Then set them up with a game in the living room, she suggested as if it were the most obvious solution in the world. Or take them outside, or watch them yourself instead of sending them to bother me while I'm trying to relax. The casualness with which she expected me to abandon my work responsibilities to entertain her children while she relaxed in my home was the final straw. 52 years of being the accommodating one, the reliable one, the one who never made waves suddenly seemed like a prison sentence I could no longer endure. Or you could parent your own children, I said, my voice low but steady. Watch them yourself instead of sending them to bother me while I'm working. Her face hardened. You know, Maria, this is why you're alone. You have no idea what it's like to be a parent. We don't get to just lock ourselves away when things get inconvenient. No, you just dump your kids on other people and call it a vacation. I snapped back, the words flowing from some deep well of resentment I'd never allowed myself to tap into before. Rachel's mouth fell open. Well, well, she seemed at a loss for words, her face flushing darker. She turned and marched away, kids in tow, muttering something about selfishness that I pretended not to hear. I closed and locked my door again, hands shaking slightly with adrenaline. I knew I'd pay for that comment later, but in the moment, I was too frustrated to care. For perhaps the first time in my adult life, I had said exactly what I was thinking to a family member, without filtering it through the lens of peacekeeping and accommodation. It felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Sure enough, at dinner that night, Rachel had apparently shared our conversation with everyone. The table was unusually quiet until Mom broke the silence, putting down her fork with the precise movement that had always signaled a lecture was coming. Maria, Rachel told us what you said to her today, she began, her tone that of a judge delivering a verdict. I think you owe her an apology. She works very hard as a mother, and for you to suggest she's not doing her job. That's not what I said, I interrupted, something I rarely dared to do. I said she shouldn't expect me to watch her kids while I'm working on time-sensitive projects that pay for this house and everything in it. You don't understand how exhausting it is to be a parent, Rachel chimed in, her voice thick with self-righteousness. You have no responsibilities except to yourself. Must be nice to be so selfish. I looked around the table slowly, taking in each face, Mom's disapproval, Dad's discomfort, David's studied neutrality, Lisa's embarrassment, Mark's avoidance, and Rachel's smug certainty. These were the people who were supposed to know me best, to value me as I was, yet none of them seemed to see me at all. No responsibilities? I repeated quietly. I'm responsible for this house, for my career, and apparently for feeding and housing all of you for a month without any help or consideration. I'm responsible for making sure there's food in the refrigerator, clean towels in the bathrooms, and activities planned for the kids. I'm responsible for paying for everything while also trying to meet work deadlines so I can continue to pay my mortgage after you all leave. Oh, here we go again with the poor me routine, Rachel said, making air quotes. You're just bitter because you're alone. The table fell silent again. I stared at my sister, then at my parents, waiting for someone to defend me. No one did. They just looked uncomfortable, as if I was the one creating an awkward situation rather than being the target of it. You're right, I finally said, my voice quiet but steady. I don't know what it's like to be a parent, but you don't know what it's like to have your home invaded for a month, to be expected to pay for everything, to clean up after everyone, and to have your work dismissed as unimportant. I folded my napkin and placed it beside my plate with deliberate care. I'm going to work now. There are leftovers in the fridge if anyone's still hungry. I spent the rest of the evening in my office, door locked, trying to focus on code while ignoring the sounds of the TV and occasional bursts of laughter. Part of me wished I could join them, be the fun aunt and sister they wanted me to be. But another part, a part that was growing stronger by the day, was just counting down the hours until I could have my peace and quiet back. The next morning, I rose early as usual and was enjoying a rare moment of solitude with my coffee when Mom entered the kitchen. She hesitated when she saw me, then squared her shoulders and approached. Maria, about last night, she began, her tone suggesting I was the one who needed correcting. I think you need to understand that family gatherings aren't just about convenience. Sometimes we make sacrifices for the people we love. The familiar guilt trip washed over me, but this time, instead of absorbing it, I felt something shift inside. 52 years of accommodating, of swallowing my needs, of being the dependable one who never complained, something in me had reached its breaking point. You're right, Mom, I said calmly. Sacrifices are part of family relationships, but they should go both ways. Have you ever considered what I might be sacrificing to host everyone? My work, my privacy, my finances, my peace of mind? She looked taken aback, unused to me pushing back. Well, I don't see why you need to make such a fuss. When I was your age, I loved having the family together. It was never a burden. When you were my age, you had Dad's income to rely on. You didn't work outside the home, and you had 3 adult children who could help instead of adding to your workload, I pointed out. Our situations are completely different. The days crawled by, each one a test of my endurance. I retreated more and more to my office, emerging only for meals and when directly summoned. My work gradually got back on track, though it required late nights and early mornings when the house was quietest. Finally, their extended vacation came to an end. As they packed up their cars, I stood on the porch, a mixture of relief and sadness washing over me. Despite everything, they were still my family, the people who had known me longest in the world. Part of me wondered if I was the problem, too rigid, too selfish, too set in my ways to adapt to family life. Mom hugged me last, holding on a bit longer than necessary. It's been wonderful, Maria, though I have to say you could have been more hospitable. We're all a bit disappointed with how you've acted. She pulled back, her expression a perfect blend of martyrdom and reproach. I was stunned by her words. After everything I had done, everything I had provided and paid for and tolerated, I was still found wanting. The familiar shame started to rise, but something else rose faster, indignation. Disappointed with me? I stepped back from her embrace, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm I suddenly felt between us. After I rearranged my work schedule, spent thousands on food and supplies, and accommodated a last-minute change of plans without complaint? Well, yes, the attitude, the complaints about cleaning, not wanting to spend time with the kids. We're family, Maria. Family supports each other. Her tone suggested she was stating an obvious truth that I was too selfish to grasp. I opened my mouth to argue, to defend myself, to finally make her understand, then closed it again. There was no point. They would never see my side of things. Never recognize that support should flow in all directions, not just from me to them. Have a safe trip home, I said instead, stepping back toward my front door. As they drove away, I didn't wave. I just went back inside, closed the door, and leaned against it. The house was so quiet I could hear the clock ticking in the kitchen. The silence was like a balm on my raw nerves, a blessed relief after weeks of constant noise and demands. Life without family drama was pretty sweet. My work thrived. I got a substantial raise for pulling through on the critical project despite the challenges, and I finally had the peace and quiet I craved. Weekends became my own again, hiking in the mountains, reading by the fire, having a few close friends over for dinner. I began to heal from the emotional exhaustion of the extended family visit. But 2 months before Christmas, my social media notifications started blowing up. It was my sister Rachel posting photos of her kids on skis with the caption, "Getting ready for our annual Christmas ski trip at Aunt Maria's." Hash family tradition, hash ski trip, hash Christmas magic. My heart raced as I scrolled through the comments. Not only were my immediate family members planning their annual invasion, but other relatives were commenting too. "Can't wait to join you all this year. Save room for us," posted my cousin Jennifer. "Best Christmas tradition ever. We'll bring the eggnog," added Uncle Steve. With shaking hands, I called my mother. "Mom, we need to talk about Christmas," I said as soon as she answered, trying to keep the panic from my voice. "Oh, Maria, I was just about to call you." She sounded thrilled, completely oblivious to the anxiety she was causing me. "I have such exciting news. Everyone had such a wonderful time at your place last year that I mentioned it at your cousin Jen's wedding. Now the whole family wants to come, not just us, but Uncle Steve and Aunt Laura, their kids, Grandma Betty, your cousins from your father's side. About 20 people in total. Isn't that wonderful?" Before I could respond, she launched into details about sleeping arrangements and meal plans, then abruptly said she had to go because her bridge club was arriving. "We'll talk more later, dear." So excited. And she hung up. I sat there staring at my phone, rage building inside me. Without thinking, I opened my social media account and typed, "Public service announcement. I am not hosting any family members at my house this Christmas. I repeat, no one is invited to my house for the holidays. Make other plans." I posted it, turned off my phone, and went for a long hike to clear my head. When I returned and checked my notifications, I was shocked. Instead of angry responses, my family members had commented with laughing emojis and messages like, "Haha, good one, Maria. Classic Maria humor," and "See you in December." They thought I was joking. That's when I made my decision. If they wouldn't listen to my words, they'd have to learn from my actions. I went to the grocery store and stocked up on enough food and wine to last me through the holidays. Then I called a security company and had cameras installed around my property. I notified my neighbors of the situation and waited. Sure enough, exactly 1 week before Christmas, a caravan of cars pulled into my driveway. Through my security cameras, I watched as 20 people, including my parents, siblings, their kids, and extended family I barely knew, piled out with luggage, presents, and ski equipment. They looked like they were planning to stay for a month, not a visit. They rang the doorbell. I didn't answer. They knocked louder. I stayed silent. Finally, my dad called my phone. "Maria, we're all here. Open up." His voice held the familiar note of authority that had always made me comply in the past. "No," I said calmly, watching them through the camera feed on my tablet. "I told you repeatedly that I wasn't hosting Christmas. You chose not to listen. Maria, don't be ridiculous. It's freezing out here, and we've been driving for hours. The kids are tired." The disbelief in his voice was almost comical. He simply couldn't fathom that I was serious. I posted publicly that no one was invited. I texted each of you individually saying the same thing. I said no, and I meant no. My voice was steadier than I expected, a lifetime of suppressed boundaries finally finding expression. "This isn't funny anymore, Maria. Open the door right now." His tone shifted from disbelief to anger. "No," I repeated. "You'll need to find other accommodations." There's a Holiday Inn about 15 minutes away. I hung up and muted my phone. Through the cameras, I watched as my family huddled together in the cold. Mom was gesturing wildly, clearly ranting about my behavior. Rachel was trying to console her crying kids. David was pounding on my door with increasing force. The doorbell rang continuously for 20 minutes. Then I saw something that made me grab my phone immediately. The kids were making snowballs and throwing them at my windows, encouraged by their parents who seemed to think this might force me to give in. I called Rachel directly. "Tell your kids to stop throwing things at my house right now," I said without preamble. "They're just playing," she snapped. "If you let us in, I have security cameras recording everything," I interrupted, my voice cool and professional. "If they break a window, I'll report the damage to the police." After I hung up, the adults quickly stopped the kids from throwing more snowballs, but the shouting got louder. I could hear my name being called, accusations of selfishness and cruelty flying through the air. My neighbors noticed the commotion and came over. Through the cameras, I could see my elderly neighbor, Mr. Peterson, talking firmly to my family. A few minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Mr. Peterson. "Maria, your family says you've locked them out. Is everything okay?" His voice held concern, but no judgment. "Yes, Mr. Peterson." I repeatedly told them not to come, but they showed up anyway. "I'm not letting them in." The simplicity of the statement felt liberating after decades of complicated explanations and justifications. "I see," he said slowly. "Well, they're causing quite a disturbance. If they don't quiet down or leave soon, I'm afraid I'll have to call the police." "I understand. Thank you for letting me know." When I hung up, I turned up the volume on my security system. I could hear Mr. Peterson relaying our conversation to my family. "This is private property," he was explaining patiently but firmly. "If Maria doesn't want to let you in, that's her right, and you're disturbing the neighborhood. I suggest you all find somewhere else to go before the police get involved." The looks of disbelief on my family's faces were almost comical. They'd never imagined their plan could fail so completely that the reliable, accommodating Maria would actually enforce a boundary. After a heated discussion among themselves, they finally started packing back into their cars. The fallout was swift and dramatic. The next day, Rachel posted a long tearful video about how I had abandoned my family at Christmas and left children out in the cold. My social media was flooded with angry comments from relatives and even some old school friends who'd heard the story. I didn't respond to any of it. I didn't try to defend myself or explain why I'd done what I did. They'd never bothered to listen to me before, so why would they start now? Instead, I invited a few close friends over for Christmas dinner. We cooked together, exchanged modest gifts, played board games, and didn't once mention my family drama. It was the most peaceful, enjoyable Christmas I'd had in years. In the months that followed, my phone remained silent. No calls from mom on my birthday, no texts from my siblings about their kids' activities, no invitations to family gatherings. I was officially the black sheep, the cruel daughter who had turned her back on family tradition. And honestly, it was exactly what I wanted. Maybe someday they'd realize how they'd taken advantage of me. Maybe they'd understand that true family respects boundaries and doesn't treat one member like a free hotel service. Maybe they'd acknowledge that what they'd been doing was selfish and unfair. But even if that day never came, I was okay with it. I had finally stood up for myself, and that was worth more than any family approval. My house was mine again. My time was mine again. My life was mine again. At 52, I had finally learned the lesson that had eluded me for decades. Saying no to others sometimes means saying yes to yourself. On Christmas Eve, as I sat by my fireplace with a glass of wine, watching the snow fall outside my peaceful mountain home, I raised my glass in a quiet toast. To boundaries, I whispered to the empty room. And for the first time in years, the silence felt not like loneliness, but like freedom. "You're just a burden pretending this house is yours." Louise's sharp voice carried from the entrance hall as she adjusted her designer scarf while pointing out some decorative details to her real estate friend. "This garden needs a complete overhaul. Maybe by the time we return from our trip, you'll have finally found your own place." I stood frozen by the rose bushes, my gardening gloves covered in spring soil, the pruning shears hanging limply from my hand. The roses my mother Margaret had planted decades ago had just begun their first bloom of the season, their delicate pink petals unfurling in the morning light. "This is my house," I said quietly, my voice steadier than my trembling hands. "Mom left it to me. You know that, Joseph." Louise rolled her eyes dramatically at her friend, as if we were performing a well-rehearsed routine for her audience. "Here we go again with that fantasy. Tell her, Joseph." My father's jaw tightened as he approached, avoiding my gaze. At 62, his once dark hair had faded to steel gray, and new lines had appeared around his eyes since Mom died. "Your mother wanted us all to live here as a family, Claire, not for you to lord it over us." "Legally, I'm still." "Legally what, Dad?" I challenged, straightening my back, feeling a surge of courage I rarely displayed. "What exactly are your legal rights here?" He checked his watch, a nervous habit he'd had for as long as I could remember. "We're going to miss our flight. Sophia's already waiting in the car." The front door closed behind them with a heavy thud, leaving me alone amid the half-pruned roses my mother had so carefully cultivated before cancer took her 5 years ago. My name is Claire Wells. I'm 54 years old, and despite what my father and stepmother believe, I am the legal owner of this Queen Anne Victorian home in suburban Philadelphia. My mother made sure of that, placing the property in a trust with me as the beneficiary following her death. What I want is simple: respect for my mother's wishes and acknowledgement of my rightful ownership. Standing in my way are my father, who has conveniently forgotten the trust terms, and Louise, my stepmother of 3 years, who treats me like an unwanted houseguest in my own home. I took a deep breath and walked to the large bay window, watching their luxury sedan back down the driveway. My stepsister Sophia, 20, sat in the back seat, her camera raised briefly toward the house before she lowered it quickly, not wanting her mother to notice. They were headed to the Bahamas for 10 days, a family vacation from which I had been deliberately excluded. "You understand, Claire," Louise had said with false sweetness when the trip was first mentioned. "You have the garden to tend to, and someone needs to watch the house." As their car disappeared around the corner, I felt a familiar mixture of hurt and anger rising in my chest. At 54, I shouldn't still feel like the excluded child, yet here I was, fighting back tears in the garden. I had tolerated their dismissive behavior for years, telling myself it was what Mom would have wanted, for us to remain a family despite her absence. I returned to the roses, my hands still trembling slightly as I carefully trimmed a damaged branch. Gardening had become my refuge, the one place where I felt connected to Mom, where her presence seemed to linger in every plant she had selected and nurtured. I had just finished the last of the pruning when my phone buzzed in my pocket. A notification appeared on the screen, an email from Louise to my father, accidentally copied to my address. "Joseph, I've spoken with Robert. He says once we're back from vacation, we can move forward with having Claire legally removed from the house. He thinks her claim about Margaret's wishes won't hold up without the original trust documents." My stomach dropped like a stone. I sat heavily on the garden bench, my mother's favorite spot to watch the sunset. Who was Robert, and what did Louise mean about the original trust documents? With growing unease, I realized the situation was far worse than I had imagined. My mother, Margaret Wells, was a brilliant community activist who had spent her career preserving historic homes and neighborhoods in Philadelphia. This house, a Queen Anne Victorian built in 1887, had been her crowning achievement and greatest love. She purchased it as a crumbling foreclosure when I was just a child, pouring her heart and savings into its restoration. My childhood memories are filled with community meetings in our living room, the smell of varnish and paint, and my mother's infectious excitement about saving another piece of history. Dad never shared her passion. An accountant by trade, he tolerated what he called Margaret's expensive hobby, but complained constantly about the costs and disruption. Their marriage had been strained for years before Mom's diagnosis, but they stayed together, creating a facade of family harmony that I only fully understood as an adult. When Mom learned her cancer was terminal, she made careful arrangements for the future. I was 49 then, already divorced for a year, finding my way back to independence after a 30-year marriage that had slowly suffocated my sense of self. Between chemotherapy sessions, Mom consulted with attorneys, set up the trust, and had long conversations with me about her wishes for the house. "This will be yours one day," she told me, her thin hand tracing the intricate balusters of the main staircase. Your father can live here as long as he needs to, but the house belongs to you. Promise me you'll preserve it. I promise, of course. What I didn't anticipate was how quickly Dad would move on after her death. He met Louise at a fundraising event barely a year after Mom's funeral. 6 months later, she and Sophia had moved into our home, bringing with them modern furniture that clashed with the Victorian aesthetic and an attitude that suggested they were doing me a favor by occupying my father's house. Initially, I tried to accommodate them. I was still grieving and grateful for any semblance of family. Louise made occasional efforts at friendliness, though these moments always felt performative rather than genuine. Sophia remained distant, buried in her photography or sequestered in her room. Dad changed after they arrived. He began referring to Mom's carefully curated antiques as that old junk and suggesting we modernize rooms that had been historically restored. When I objected, citing Mom's wishes, he would grow distant and cold. "Your mother is gone, Claire," he'd say. "The living need to come first." I could have moved out, found my own apartment. Sometimes I asked myself why I stayed in a home where I was increasingly made to feel unwelcome. The answer was simple. This house was Mom's legacy to me, her final gift. Walking away felt like betraying her memory, like admitting that at 54, I still couldn't stand up for myself. So, I endured the subtle digs, the exclusion, the gradual erosion of my place in what should have been my home. Now, staring at Louise's accidentally forwarded email, I wondered if my patience had been a mistake. With my father and Louise now thousands of miles away, I decided to use their absence to search for answers. Who was Robert, and what did Louise mean about the trust documents? I started in my father's home office, a room that had once been my mother's sunroom. The transformation was symbolic of the larger changes in our house, her warm, plant-filled retreat, now a sterile workspace dominated by Louise's organizational system. I hesitated at the door, feeling like an intruder despite being the property's rightful owner. "This is ridiculous," I muttered to myself, squaring my shoulders. "I'm 54 years old. I shouldn't be sneaking around my own house." The desk drawers yielded nothing unusual. Office supplies, bills, a few family photos with me conspicuously absent. I noticed a recent picture of Joseph, Louise, and Sophia at some resort, all smiles and vacation clothes. My father looked relaxed in a way he rarely did at home. I turned my attention to the filing cabinet, methodically working through folders labeled with Louise's precise handwriting. In the back of the bottom drawer, I found a thick manila envelope labeled Wells House Legal. My hands trembled slightly as I opened it, spreading the contents across the desk. Inside were copies of documents I recognized. The trust agreement my mother had established, naming me as beneficiary and my father as a lifetime tenant with specific conditions. But there were also newer papers I'd never seen. Correspondence with someone named Robert Greene, a real estate attorney, discussing strategies to invalidate the outdated trust and establish clear ownership. A yellow sticky note in my father's handwriting read, "Original trust documents in Margaret's old lockbox." Claire might have key. Cold understanding washed over me. They were looking for the original trust documents, likely to destroy them. Without those papers, it would be my word against my father's about Mom's intentions. As I continued reading, the depth of the betrayal became clear. My father had been consulting with this attorney for months, seeking ways to claim the house outright. Louise was actively involved, suggesting they could argue that Mom had been mentally compromised when she established the trust due to her medication. The most recent letter from Robert outlined their strongest case, claiming that I had violated the trust conditions by interfering with Joseph's quiet enjoyment of the property, a bizarre inversion of reality that made me the antagonist in my own home. I sat back, papers scattered around me, a strange numbness replacing my initial shock. My father wasn't just forgetting my ownership. He was actively plotting to take my inheritance, to erase my mother's final wishes. "How could you, Dad?" I whispered to the empty room, my voice cracking. The betrayal felt physical, like a blow to my chest. Almost mechanically, I gathered the documents and returned to my bedroom. From the back of my closet, I retrieved a small fireproof box, my mother's final gift to me. Inside was the original trust agreement, exactly where she told me to keep it, along with a sealed envelope I'd never opened, marked in case of disputes. My hands shook as I broke the seal. Inside was a letter in my mother's handwriting and a business card for Helen Fisher, Trust Administrator. My darling Claire, the letter began. If you're reading this, then Joseph has forgotten his promises to me. I hoped he would honor my wishes, but I've prepared for the possibility that he might not. Helen has the power to enforce the trust terms if necessary. The house is yours, sweet girl. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. All my love, Mom. I ran my fingers over her familiar handwriting, tears blurring my vision. Even from beyond the grave, she was protecting me, anticipating threats I couldn't have imagined coming from my own father. I should have been relieved to have this safeguard, but instead, I felt a profound sense of loss. Whatever remaining illusions I had about my father's character had been shattered completely. The parent I thought I knew, flawed, but ultimately caring, was a fiction. Though I now had the means to protect my inheritance, I wasn't yet ready to use it. I needed time to process this betrayal, to decide how to move forward without destroying what little family I had left. I carefully returned everything to its hiding place, my mind racing with questions. How long had he been planning this? Was his relationship with Louise somehow connected to his designs on the house? And most painfully, had he ever truly accepted Mom's wishes, or had he been biding his time from the beginning? The next morning, I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring at Helen Fisher's business card. The morning light streamed through the stained glass panels my mother had lovingly restored, casting colorful patterns across the antique wood. After a sleepless night, I'd come to a decision. This stops now, I said aloud to the empty kitchen, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. I dialed the number on Helen's card. After explaining who I was, I heard a warm, professional voice respond. I've been wondering when I might hear from you, Claire. We arranged to meet that afternoon at her downtown office. Helen turned out to be a no-nonsense woman in her mid-60s with silver hair and piercing eyes that reminded me of my mother's. Her office walls displayed framed newspaper clippings of various historic preservation victories, and I recognized my mother in several photos, standing proudly alongside Helen. Margaret and I were friends since college, Helen explained, noticing my gaze on the photos. We fought many battles together to save this city's history. Your mother was the passionate voice, I was the legal muscle. She settled behind her desk and reviewed the documents I'd brought. Margaret was very thorough in establishing this trust, she explained. The conditions of your father's tenancy are quite specific. He may reside in the home rent-free for his lifetime, provided he acknowledges your ownership and doesn't interfere with your rights as beneficiary. He's been doing the opposite, I said, sharing the evidence I'd found. He's actively trying to invalidate the trust. Helen's expression darkened as she studied the papers from my father's office. This attorney Green is taking an aggressive approach. Have there been other issues besides denying your ownership? I hesitated, then described the increasing hostility, the systematic exclusion, and the most recent incident before their vacation. As I spoke, I realized how much I'd normalized their behavior, how I'd diminished my own feelings to keep the peace. I see, she made careful notes. Verbal abuse and creating an inhospitable environment for the beneficiary would also violate the terms. Your mother anticipated potential conflicts and built in protections. What kind of protections? I asked, leaning forward. As trust administrator, I have the authority to enforce the conditions, up to and including terminating your father's right to occupy the property if he's in substantial breach. A mixture of relief and anxiety washed over me. Here was the solution, but at what cost? Evicting my own father seemed extreme, potentially destroying any chance of reconciliation. I don't necessarily want to kick him out, I admitted, fidgeting with my wedding ring, a habit I hadn't broken despite 8 years of divorce. I just want him to respect Mom's wishes and treat me with basic decency. Helen nodded sympathetically. Let's start with a formal letter reminding him of the trust terms. Sometimes a legal reality check is enough to correct behavior. This approach seemed reasonable, firm, but not nuclear. Helen drafted the letter while I waited, outlining my father's obligations under the trust and requesting a meeting upon his return to discuss ongoing compliance. This should be waiting for him when he gets back, she said, handing me the envelope. In the meantime, document any further communications or incidents. If he escalates rather than complies, we'll need evidence to take stronger action. I left feeling cautiously optimistic. The letter would serve as a wake-up call without permanently damaging our relationship. Perhaps once my father understood that his plans with Robert Greene wouldn't succeed, he'd accept reality, and we could rebuild some semblance of family harmony. That evening, that evening, I decided to venture into my mother's old sunroom, a space that Louise had declared wasted and relegated to storage. Dust covered the wicker furniture and potting benches. My mother's gardening books stood in neat rows on shelves, untouched since her death. I ran my fingers along their spines, remembering how she would consult them before planning each season's plantings. In the corner sat several boxes labeled in my mother's handwriting: Preservation Campaign 1990s, Community Action Files, Historical Research. I opened one at random and found myself facing a younger version of my mother in a newspaper clipping. Local activists save historic district. Read the headline. There she was, arm in arm with Helen and other women, standing defiantly in front of a row of Victorian homes. I sat cross-legged on the floor, losing myself in my mother's life work. I found minutes from community meetings, impassioned letters to city officials, and detailed research on architectural features. In one folder, I discovered a journal. Opening it, I realized it was from the year my mother turned 54, my exact age now. Spoke at the city council meeting today, she had written. My voice shook, but I had to stand up for what's right. The developers want to tear down grandmother's neighborhood for another shopping center. I won't let them erase our history. My phone chimed with a text from Louise. We need to talk about your behavior while we're gone. Joseph is very upset. Expect changes when we return. Attached was a photo of my father's office. The desk drawers partially open. Papers not quite as I left them. They must have installed cameras before leaving. Something I should have anticipated. My intrusion had been discovered. Shortly after, an email arrived from my father. I'm deeply disappointed in your breach of privacy. Searching through my personal documents shows exactly why you're not responsible enough for home ownership. We'll be consulting with our attorney immediately upon our return. My heart raced as I forwarded both messages to Helen, my hands shaking. Her response was immediate. This changes our approach. Their aggressive stance suggests they won't respond reasonably to the letter. I recommend you allow me to exercise the trust enforcement provisions. Now, in plain language, she was suggesting I authorize the eviction process, the nuclear option I'd hoped to avoid. Before I could reply, another email arrived, this time from Robert Greene directly. Miss Wells, I've been retained by Joseph and Louise Wells regarding the disputed property at 1847 Chestnut Avenue. Please cease any communication with my clients and direct all future correspondence to my office. Be advised that we are preparing legal action regarding your unfounded claims to the property. My heart sank as I realized my cautious, measured approach had backfired. By giving them warning, I'd only accelerated their plans. The hope I'd felt earlier evaporated, replaced by the sickening certainty that this conflict was heading toward an irreparable break. Mom, I whispered to the empty sunroom, surrounded by the artifacts of her life's work. What would you have me do now? I picked up her journal again, turning to a later entry. Sometimes standing your ground means losing people you love. But if we don't defend what matters, who will we become? In that moment, sitting among my mother's things, I felt a strange calm settle over me. I was my mother's daughter. And at 54, the same age she was when she fought her biggest preservation battle, I would find the courage to defend what she had entrusted to me. The next morning, I called Helen to discuss our options. Her advice was clear and firm. Claire, your father has engaged legal counsel who's already taking an aggressive stance. This suggests they intend to move quickly once they return. We need to respond with equal decisiveness. What exactly are you proposing? I asked, a knot forming in my stomach as I paced the kitchen, where so many family meals had once been shared in happier times. I recommend we petition the court for an emergency enforcement of the trust provisions, including a restraining order preventing your father and his wife from re-entering the property pending a full hearing. A restraining order? Isn't that extreme? The words caught in my throat. I never imagined I'd be considering such measures against my own father. Not in this context. Their communications show clear intent to violate the trust and potentially remove you from your rightful home. The restraining order would simply maintain the status quo until a judge can review the full facts. I continued pacing, my reflection passing in and out of the antique mirrors that lined the hallway. Each one had been carefully selected by my mother to enhance the period details of the home. They're on vacation for 8 more days. Do we really need to act so quickly? The timing works to our advantage, Helen explained patiently. Filing now gives us time to secure the order before they return, preventing a potentially volatile confrontation. Remember, they don't know you've contacted me or that you have the original trust documents. Her logic was sound, but the emotional weight of the decision felt crushing. This wasn't just about property rights. It was about severing what remained of my family. Let me think about it, I said finally. After hanging up, I wandered through the silent house, running my fingers along the walnut banister my mother had lovingly restored, examining the stained glass window she'd commissioned to replace a broken original. Every corner held her memory, her vision of what this home should be. I found myself in Sophia's room, surprised by its contents. Unlike Louise's sleek, modern aesthetic, Sophia had surrounded herself with vintage elements that complemented the house. On her walls hung framed photographs, her own work, I realized, capturing architectural details of our home. The curve of a banister, morning light through stained glass, roses in the garden. They were beautiful, revealing an artistic eye and appreciation I hadn't known she possessed. On her desk sat a portfolio. I hesitated, then opened it, finding more photographs of historic buildings around Philadelphia. There was real talent here, and a sensibility that reminded me of my mother's eye for beauty in forgotten places. My contemplation was interrupted by another notification, a banking alert I'd set up after my divorce, making me cautious about financial movements. To my shock, my father had remotely initiated a wire transfer from our shared household account, the account I primarily funded for utilities and upkeep, to Robert Greene's law firm. He was using my own money to finance his legal attack against me. This final betrayal crystallized my decision. I called Helen back immediately. "I'm ready to proceed," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. "What do you need from me?" The next few days passed in a blur of legal activity. Helen filed the emergency petition, gathered affidavits, and compiled evidence of my father's actions. My role was to document the home's condition, catalog my mother's restorations, and prepare a statement about the trust creation. Between these tasks, I continued exploring my mother's preservation files, finding comfort and strength in her words. I discovered photographs of her addressing city council meetings, standing firm against developers who threatened historic neighborhoods. In her journal entries from her mid-50s, I recognized my own struggles with confidence and purpose. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm foolish to care so much about these old buildings," she'd written. "But they're more than wood and stone. There are stories, our history, our connection to those who came before." 3 days later, 3 days before my father and Louise were due to return, Helen called with unexpected news. "The judge has granted our petition," she said. "But there's a complication. In reviewing your mother's original will and trust documents, we discovered something significant." "What kind of something?" I asked, sitting down at the kitchen table, my hand instinctively reaching for the locket I wore containing a small photo of my mother. "Your mother added a provision we weren't aware of. If your father remarried, the trust required him to either purchase your half of the property at market value or relocate within 1 year." I sat stunned, trying to process this information. He was supposed to buy me out after marrying Louise? Yes, the provision was triggered 3 years ago when he married Louise, but it appears he never disclosed this to the trust. "Margaret wanted to ensure you wouldn't be forced to live with a stepmother who might not respect your position." The implications hit me all at once. So, not only was he violating the terms by denying my ownership, but he's been in breach of the trust for 2 years by not buying me out or moving. Exactly. And there's more. Margaret left a sealed letter with my office to be opened if this specific provision was violated. My heart raced. "What does it say?" "I think you should read it yourself," Helen said. "Can you come to my office this afternoon?" Helen's office hours later. I sat in Helen's office, my mother's letter trembling in my hands. The familiar handwriting blurred through my tears as I read her final message to me. My dearest Claire, if you're reading this, Joseph has remarried and chosen to remain in our home without honoring the trust terms. I wish I could say I'm surprised, but I've always known his attachment to the house was more about possession than appreciation. What Joseph doesn't know, what I never told anyone, is that the funds for purchasing and restoring our home didn't come from my salary alone. They came primarily from my grandmother's inheritance, with the specific condition that the property remain with the women of our family. Joseph has no legal claim to the house beyond what I granted him in the trust, which he has now violated. I've instructed Helen to help you claim what is fully and rightfully yours. The house is your legacy, your heritage, not just from me, but from generations of women in our family who fought for spaces of their own. Stand firm, my brave girl. At 54, I found my voice. You will find yours too. All my love, Mom. I looked up at Helen, who had been quietly waiting while I absorbed this revelation. She knew, I whispered. She knew he might do this. Helen nodded. Your mother was a remarkable woman. She could see clearly what others often missed. This changes everything, doesn't it? I asked, carefully folding the letter. Your father has no claim whatsoever on the property. None? Helen confirmed. Margaret made certain of that. She was 54 when she fought her biggest preservation battle, I said, more to myself than to Helen. The same age I am now. Yes, Helen smiled gently. She often said that was when she finally found the courage to speak her truth, no matter the consequences. Legal preparations. Armed with this new information, Helen and I revised our legal strategy. Rather than simply enforcing the trust conditions, we would pursue complete termination of my father's tenancy rights based on multiple breaches, denying my ownership, creating a hostile environment, attempting to invalidate the trust, failing to comply with the remarriage provision, and misusing household funds. The restraining order is now in place, Helen explained as we finalized the paperwork in her office. They won't be able to enter the property when they return. The sheriff will serve the formal eviction notice at that time and will proceed with a court hearing for permanent resolution. I nodded, feeling oddly calm despite the enormity of what we were setting in motion. What kind of timeline are we looking at? The temporary order lasts 30 days. The hearing for permanent resolution is scheduled for the third week, which gives your father time to secure new housing arrangements. As I drove home, I contemplated the practical aspects of this abrupt transition. Most of the furniture was my mother's, documented in the trust inventory, but my father and Louise had added their own pieces. Sophia had her own bedroom filled with personal belongings. I would need to make arrangements for them to collect their possessions under supervision. The unfairness of disrupting Sophia's life weighed on me. Despite our distant relationship, she was an innocent bystander in the adults' conflict. I decided to pack her things myself, carefully and respectfully, to minimize her distress. I spent the evening in my mother's sunroom, which I had begun clearing and cleaning. I'd found more of her journals and photographs, arranging them on newly dusted shelves. In a way, I was reclaiming this space just as I was reclaiming the house itself. As dusk fell, the room took on a golden glow, and I could almost feel my mother's presence beside me. Unexpected call 2 days before their scheduled return. I received an unexpected call from a Bahamas phone number I didn't recognize. Is this Claire Wells? A young female voice asked. Yes. Who's calling? I replied, puzzled. It's Sophia. Her voice sounded strained. I need to talk to you about something important. Surprised, I asked. Aren't you still in the Bahamas with your mom and my dad? I am, but I'm calling from the hotel phone. I don't want them to know. She paused. I heard them talking last night. They were fighting about the house and about you. My stomach tightened. What did they say? Joseph said their lawyer thinks they can get the house if they claim you're mentally unstable or something. Sophia's voice dropped lower. Mom suggested they could make it look like you're dangerous to be around. They talked about planting something in your room when we get back. I don't know what exactly, but it sounded bad. The revelation stunned me. They were planning to fabricate evidence against me? Potentially something to suggest I was dangerous or unbalanced. It was a desperate, despicable tactic. Thank you for telling me, Sophia. That was brave of you. I just It didn't seem right. She hesitated. And I heard other stuff too about how the house is actually yours, not Joseph's. Is that true? Yes, I said simply. My mother left it to me. There was a long silence. They never told me that. Mom always said it was Joseph's house and you were just living there until you got your life together. Another pause. I'm sorry for how they've treated you. Her unexpected empathy brought tears to my eyes. It's not your fault, Sophia. None of this is. I should go before they notice I'm gone. But I wanted you to know. Her voice suddenly sounded younger, vulnerable. What's going to happen now? I'm not sure yet, I said gently, not wanting to alarm her with details of the restraining order. But I'll make sure you're taken care of, I promise. After the call ended, I immediately contacted Helen to relay this new information. This changes things, she said grimly. If they're planning to fabricate evidence, we need to take additional precautions. I'll contact the court about modifying the restraining order to prevent them from entering the property under any circumstances, even to collect belongings. We'll arrange for a court-appointed supervisor for that process. I agreed with her assessment, but a new worry had emerged. What about Sophia? She's just 20. She shouldn't be caught in the middle of this. We can request special provisions for her in the court order, Helen suggested. Perhaps supervised visits or a neutral exchange location for her possessions. As we discussed these modifications, another call came in, this time from my father directly. Against my better judgment, I answered. Claire, he began, his voice falsely warm. We've been thinking about our conversation before we left. Louise and I want to apologize for our harsh words. We'd like to have a family meeting when we get back to discuss everyone's needs fairly. The sudden change in tone confirmed Sophia's warning. They were setting me up, trying to get me to lower my guard before their return. That sounds reasonable, I replied, matching his artificial warmth. We definitely have a lot to discuss. As soon as the call ended, I turned to Helen. They're planning something specific for when they return. We need to be ready. She nodded grimly. Don't worry, we will be. Day of return. The day of my father and Louise's return dawned clear and bright, a stark contrast to the storm about to break over our family. As instructed by Helen, I had vacated the house temporarily, watching from across the street as the necessary parties assembled on the front lawn. The sheriff's deputy, Helen in her role as trust administrator, and a court representative to document the proceedings. I sat in my car, hands gripping the steering wheel, my mother's locket cool against my skin. I'd spent the past 2 days transforming her sunroom from a storage space back into the vibrant hub of activity it had once been. Her preservation photos lined the walls, her journals displayed prominently on the restored wicker table. It was as if her spirit had reclaimed the space. Their taxi pulled up at precisely 2:15 p.m. I watched my father emerge first, his face relaxed from vacation until he spotted the official vehicles. Louise followed, designer sunglasses hiding her initial reaction. Sophia hung back slightly, catching my eye across the distance with a small, almost imperceptible nod. From my position, I couldn't hear the exact words exchanged, but the body language told the story clearly enough. The sheriff stepped forward, officially serving them with a court order. My father's posture stiffened in shock, his hand reaching for the documents. Louise ripped off her sunglasses, gesturing wildly as she presumably protested. Helen remained calm, pointing occasionally to specific sections of the paperwork. The court representative took notes and photographs, maintaining an official record of the proceedings. As the reality of their situation became clear, my father's face transformed, first purpling with rage, then draining to ash-gray disbelief. Louise's reaction was more volatile, her arms flailing as she shouted at the officials, then turning accusingly toward my father. I had imagined this moment differently, perhaps with satisfaction or vindication. Instead, I felt a complex mixture of sadness and resolution. This wasn't a victory to celebrate, but a necessary ending to enable a new beginning. At 54, I was finally standing my ground, just as my mother had done at my age. The final blow came when Helen handed them the last document. My mother's letter explaining the true origin of the house funds and the generations-long female inheritance that preceded me. My father sank onto one of the suitcases, the facade of righteous indignation crumbling into stunned defeat as he finally understood the depth of his miscalculation. The house had never been his to claim. It had always unequivocally been mine. Weeks later, in the weeks following that decisive confrontation, the practical matters of separation proceeded with formal precision. My father and Louise secured an apartment across town, collecting their personal belongings under court supervision. Our communication was limited to terse emails regarding logistics, the warmth of family irreparably damaged by betrayal and legal intervention. The most surprising development came from Sophia. 2 days after the eviction, she contacted me, requesting to meet at a local art gallery. They've been fighting constantly, she confided as we wandered among exhibits of urban photography. Mom blames Joseph for not telling her the truth about the house. Joseph blames her for pushing him to take legal action. She hesitated before a photograph of an abandoned Victorian similar to our home. I was wondering if I could visit sometimes. The house. It feels more like home than anywhere we've lived. Her request touched me unexpectedly. Of course you can, Sophia. Anytime. She became a regular visitor, initially for weekend afternoons, eventually staying overnight in her old room when tensions at the apartment became unbearable. She showed me her portfolio of architectural photography, and I recognized in her the same eye for beauty and history that my mother had possessed. Despite our differences, we formed a tentative bond, two people collateral damage in the chaos of our parents' choices. My father attempted reconciliation once, arriving unannounced on a Sunday morning while Sophia was photographing the garden. I met him on the porch, unwilling to invite him inside just yet. I never meant for things to go this far, he offered awkwardly, looking older and smaller than I remembered. After your mother died, I just couldn't accept that she hadn't trusted me with the house. It wasn't about trust, Dad, I replied, feeling a calmness I hadn't expected. It was about legacy. Mom wanted to ensure the house remained in the family for generations. He nodded slowly, looking past me to the entryway where my mother's favorite mirror still hung. I understand that now. Too late, I suppose. Maybe not too late for everything, I said, surprising myself with the offer. But we need time. Perhaps someday we would rebuild some version of a relationship. But for now, the wounds were too fresh, the betrayal too profound. As for the house, I threw myself into continuing my mother's preservation work, focusing on the third floor renovation she had planned but never completed. Sophia's eye for design proved invaluable, her photography documenting each stage of the restoration. Each restored molding and carefully chosen fixture honored my mother's vision and strengthened my connection to the women who came before me. I also began opening the home for small community meetings, reviving my mother's tradition of hosting local preservation activists in our living room. At the first gathering, Helen raised a toast to Margaret, whose vision lives on through Claire. The house has always known who it belonged to, Helen remarked during a quiet moment as we sat in the garden my mother had planted. Your mother would be proud of how you've protected her legacy. She was right. This wasn't just about ownership. It was about honoring the past while building my future, exactly as my mother had intended. At 54, I had finally found my voice, just as my mother had found hers at the same age. And in doing so, I had reclaimed not just a house, but my place in the world. Yes, I said, watching as Sophia photographed the evening light falling through the trees onto the Victorian facade. Mom always said we don't really own these old houses. We're just their caretakers for a while. I'm ready for that now.